Hello and welcome to the City of London Corporation's Apprenticeship webinars. I'm Claire Tunley, the Head of Employability at the City of London Corporation. We've created this series of videos to help businesses understand the process of apprenticeships and dismantle some of the complexity around taking on an apprentice. We're covering a range of apprenticeship topics, and today we're going to look at training providers. We know that lots of businesses don't necessarily know where to start in picking a training provider for their apprenticeship. As a caveat, I have to say all information covered today is accurate as of today, but please do refer to the Government Apprenticeship website for the most recent information, as information and guidance does change. Today I'm joined by Nicola Bolton, the MD of Acumen Work and formerly Shadow COO of the Institute for Apprenticeships. Hello Nicola.
Hi Claire.
So we've heard in an earlier webinar how the training element of an apprenticeship supports the apprentice to develop the knowledge, skills and behaviours required as part of the apprenticeship. So clearly the training provider is a key part of the apprenticeship process, Nicola.
Absolutely, Claire. And basically, the government has tried to make this easy for employers by setting up something called the Register of Approved Training Providers. And basically that's where you as a business go to if you want to find an apprenticeship training provider. Now when you get there, you'll see all sorts of different types of training provider listed. And what you want to be looking for is something called a main provider, because those are the types of training providers that you as a business can directly commission your apprenticeship training from. So before you contract a training provider, it's really important to read and understand the contract carefully and be very clear about the actual procurement process and, more importantly, the terms of service that you're going to get from this training provider.
Thank you, Nicola. And we know that there's two other types of training providers, but these are more unusual. So some employers are a training provider in their own right and can directly deliver training, but we know to become your own training provider you have to register and be subject to Ofsted inspections, so not many employers choose that route. And also I think there's supporting providers who provide training as a subcontractor, but they are a subcontractor for a main provider. So like you say, most employers will just work with a main provider.
That's absolutely right.
So we've learned from some of the other webinars that the training actually can be delivered in many different ways. It's quite flexible, so some online learning, distance learning, classroom-based activity, maybe day release or block release. And so it's really up to the business to find the training provider that works for them. But what else can you expect from a training provider, Nicola?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you need to expect your training provider to spend time assessing and understanding what you need as a business, and that's, they'll be asking you lots of questions. And I think secondly, you also need to remember that you're in control. So you've got you're in a position where if you can say to the training provider, actually, I'd like the training delivered in this particular type of way. I'd like it delivered sort of on-site, off-site. I'd like it front-loaded, for example, so a whole month at the beginning of an apprenticeship, for example, or a day release. So that's the key thing to remember. And I think the other main thing is that you, together with your training provider, need to agree the total price, and that includes VAT, by the way, which will cover your training and the assessment by an endpoint assessor, and I know you've got another webinar on that, Claire, and also any subcontracted services. And once that price is agreed, it shouldn't alter, and therefore you've got a very firm base to go forward with your training provider for the duration of the apprenticeships.
And those kinds of costs are things that you can draw from the levy pot if you are an apprenticeship levy payer. That's right, isn't it?
That's absolutely right, yes.
So you're really saying to shop around and talk to training providers and find the right fit for what you need as a business?
I think that's absolutely right, and there are some key factors that you'll consider, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later on in terms of assessing a training provider's quality. I think the only other thing to add about what you can expect from a training provider is that training providers must offer you the option of using a recruit and apprentice service. And you can also ask them about their other recruitment services and other services that they can offer you.
So clearly selecting a training provider is a really important part of the process. How can I ensure that I choose the right one, Nicola? What questions should I ask?
Well, Claire, you'll see in the webinar, viewers will see that there's a slide which gives some really good detailed questions. I think the important things to think about though are actually what's going to be included and what's not going to be included, and be really specific about actually the finance and the costs and everything that's going to be delivered. There'll be specific things that you'll want to make sure that these training providers are going to actually tailor what they do to your business needs, and how are they going to keep you informed about the progress that's being made. You'll also want to really probe the training provider to check out that actually they can support and deliver the training in the way that you want it delivered, and also where you want it delivered. You know, if you've got offices around the country, for example, how are they going to support your apprentices that are based, you know, not just in London, for example. And then finally, you'll want to make sure that they're really familiar with your industry as well.
Are there any specific indicators that we can look at to give us confidence that we've got a good training provider?
Absolutely. First of all, you've got Ofsted, which is the Office for Standards in Education, for those not familiar with Ofsted, which actually rates how good training providers are at delivering frameworks. And this is a really good indicator of the quality of training, but actually for new standards that are just being delivered, the training providers won't have been assessed yet, and so there won't actually be any Ofsted ratings. So you then need to look at other things, for example, like quality marks, and where particular training providers have been accredited by professional institutes, for example, that will give you a bit of check and balance on how well they're being recognised within the industry.
That's a good point, actually. So if you've got a professional body that you work with as a business, it might be a good place to start. Go to your professional body to talk about some training providers that they accredit.
Absolutely. And actually recommendations and referrals are a really good way of getting those indicators as well. So really, you know, a training provider shouldn't be concerned if you go and ask them where they've delivered this before. Equally, completion rates is actually really important. So quite often you'll find a training provider will tell you how many apprentices they've had on their courses, but they don't always tell you what the pass mark is, if you like. You know, so have they got, for example, 100% of the people through their programs? So I think the final thing to think about there is the costs and delivery associated with the training, and what sort of facilities they've got available, and, you know, have they got offices, have they got online facilities, and that type of thing that they can provide.
So I'm expecting training providers will equally be expecting something from an employer that they work with. Can you tell us a little bit about what they might want to have from you?
Absolutely. Well, training providers are going to expect you to be really involved in this process, and that starts from the basics, like just providing them with evidence of the individual's eligibility for employment, for example, and that actually this is a genuine job which this apprenticeship is going to support a person to move into. And over time, they'll expect you to be involved in, you know, signing up to the schedule of training and the content that they're going to deliver for you, and also that you will need to confirm that the training is not already funded from elsewhere, so that you're not trying to sort of doubly get government funding, for example, for some training. And then the other thing that employers need to think about is that actually a training provider will be expecting them to select the apprentice assessment organisation and actually agree a price for that endpoint assessment. So although the training provider will be doing the liaison with that endpoint assessor, you as the employer need to have picked the organisation for you.
Okay. So do join us for the endpoint assessment webinar if you want to hear more about endpoint assessment. So that concludes our webinar on training providers. So I just want to say thank you to Nicola for joining us.
You're welcome.